Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video or podcast on your favorite platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms. If you go to miamighostchronicles.com, you can find links to the videos or MP3 files, which you can download and enjoy without commercial interruptions. If you're into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If scary stories are your bag, and listening to encounters with cryptids, ghosts, dogmen, and other weird creatures sends a shiver up your spine, then go to supernaturalstorytime.com for links to our weekly podcasts. Noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird can be found at eerie.news or visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. Please subscribe to my newsletter on Substack. Just go to mppelliser.com for a link. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, everybody. How's everybody doing? Happy Mardi Gras? Yes, it's Marlene and Henry. This is our third annual Mardi Gras show. And no, I did not do it. I didn't do it live. Life got in the way. Working on a book, too many things, but here we are. Kept my word. We're doing the Mardi Gras thing. And by the way, the theme this year is, as you can tell, a Mardi Gras this year falls on the 13th. Tuesday. And a lot of people say, wow, what's wrong with the 13th on a Tuesday? Well, it turns out that for Hispanics, the bad luck day was not Friday the 13th, it was Tuesday the 13th. I don't know the origins of that. I'm sure there's got to be something. But even so, as I looked at some of this stuff, the 13 number, some people say it has occult symbology, but the 13, whether it's Friday the 13th or Tuesday or whatever, the 13th has always had like a bad luck stigma attached to it. And I'm going to get into that. I'm going to explain, as a matter of fact, why it is that, because like I said, sometimes, things happen and people like forget, like, oh, how, it's just, what's surprising is how seriously some people really take this stuff about the superstition. How's that? Even people that say, oh, I'm not superstitious, yada, yada, yada. But when it comes down to crunch time, they become superstitious. What is it? Just in case. Just in case. All right. So, yeah. It's an unusual thing. Mardi Gras on the 13th, and that's the title, as a matter of fact, of this year's show. Okay. And I'm going to get into, this is what's considered the origins, of Friday the 13th. And, the unlucky connotations to the number 13 has been around for decades. In modern times, one only has to look at the slasher series Friday the 13th, which produced 12 films from 1980 to 2009, which of course that film really was, the 13th just happened to be one of those things. I don't know if the original movie put the people on the 13th, with Jason Voorhees, but from there, the 12 films were basically produced around the, that franchise of Jason that refused to die. Jason in Outer Space, I think he went. Anyway, but this thing with the 13th, one of the first to popularize, for better or worse, the significance of the 13th was a gentleman called Captain William Festus Fowler. Yes, like Uncle Festus from the Addams Family. Who claimed, and this is in reverse, he claimed that the number 13 played a prominent role in his life, and he was the originator of something called the 13 Club. And he was a proprietor of a pub, which he leased on September 13th, 1863, right? And this is a place called the Knickerbocker Cottage, and it had been a roadside inn since 1825. This was an old-time landmark on 6th Avenue and 27th Street, New York, which dated all the way back to the 1730s. In other words, pre-revolutionary times. He gave up the lease on April 13, 1883, 20 years later. During these years, he owned a black cat named Cornelius. And you'll see his idea was to do all the things that supposedly were bad luck, which is the black cat. So he flew in the face of the superstition, was his point. And for some reason, the 13, if you look at it, there was a lot of things that happened to him where the 13 number, um, in other words, happened to him not because of his choice that he picked it, played a prominent role in his life. Now, he served in the Civil War and was an architect of renown in New York, having designed several theaters on Broadway. He designed the Bellevue Hospital, the Broadway Central Hotel, and other landmarks. He was an old Freemason of high standing and had many personal acquaintances among the powerful of New York. His name was the 13th, listed on the roll of the ancient Arabic order of the notables of the mystic shrine. Okay. And perhaps it was this repetition of the number 13 which prompted him to gather 13 men to sit down for dinner, which he admitted initially was difficult because many promised they would but failed to show up. So in other words, and by the way, the people he rubbed elbows with, these were movers and shakers in New York, supposedly non-superstitious, educated men. And they would say, yeah, I'll be there. Then when it came to crunch time, nobody showed. And that's why it took him a while to get the 13, well, 12 others besides himself. Okay, this is how it was held. They held a business meeting. This was the first meeting of the 13 Club at 7:13 p.m. on Friday, January 13, 1882, in the Knickerbocker Cottage, the number of which was the Avenue 454, which adds up to 13. And at 8:13 p.m., they sat down to dinner in room 13. To enter the room, they passed under a ladder of 13 rungs. The old American flag with 13 stars was canopied over the chairman's head. There were 13 jets of gas. The men of 13 ate 13 courses, which were prettily printed on a pasteboard coffin lid, adorned with 13 gilt nail heads. 13 bottles of wine decked the tables. 13 gay boutonnieres lay near the 13 plates. So in other words, he drove this 13 thing, like, all the way. The guests enjoyed themselves, but there was terror among the waiters, who were afraid they would be doomed by the same fate of the participants. 2 of the waiters fled from the house after setting the table. Now, the name of the original 13, besides Captain Fowler, were Daniel Wolfe, Henry A. Heiser, Charles Southern, James Reed, Marvin Clark, Samuel Jones, Julius Wiskowski, Richard Fitzgerald, George Powell, John Mills, Edwin Dew, and Lehman Israels. Okay. By 1894, fast forward, remember this took place in 1882. Over 13 years later, only 4 of them had died, and the popularity of the club had increased. It attracted governors and senators, as well as prominent members of the bench, the bar, the church, the press, and impresarios of commercial enterprise. Whereas at the beginning, everybody was like, okay, Captain, I don't know if I'm going to accept your invitation. But 13 years later, everybody was on deck with it. You know, like if you were a mover and a shaker, you belonged to a 13 club. Now, none of the members of those original 13 died within the year prescribed by superstition, as the allotted time of life after dining in a party of 13. In other words, the superstition was, if you were a party of 13 eating dinner, you would die within the first year. 1 member died 15 months after his last dinner in the club. 1 ex-member who never attended died, and 1 honorary member who never dined in the club passed away. In the years to follow, numerous 13 clubs were founded around the United States and in Europe. Now, the life membership cost $13. The dues of active members were 13 cents per month. The parent club was incorporated September 13th, 1882, and they granted charters to other clubs for a fee of $13.13. The members intentionally spilled salt at the table and used the motto, Morituri e salutamus, to die with your greeting. Their wine list was printed in the shape of tombstones. The intent of the club was to repudiate superstition. But it wasn't only the number 13, but the owl. Captain Fowler observed in 1883 that the increase of the owl's popularity was the gathering of the Owl Club, who came to the hollow tree roost at the Knickerbocker Cottage at midnight. So in other words, even the owls, which were kind of connotated, if you look at old Halloween stuff, it was a black cat, the owl, pumpkin, all of this was tied into Halloween bad luck. Well, I guess there was another group of people who decided to put together the Owl Club. They would go to the Knickerbocker, hang out, and I guess gather at midnight to the hollow tree roost, which I'm going to assume, hey, be careful. Yes, in case anybody's wondering, yes, it's here. This is it, the enforcer, because as you can tell, I've got somebody there that's might need to be enforced. Anyway, so getting back to this. So, hey, Slim, cut it out. By the way, she's almost toothless. It's what's really fun. Slim! Okay, I've got my wingman being the enforcer here. Okay, Slim, cool it. So, anyway, besides the 13 Club, he gets, he gets the Out Club. Now, he dies in 1897. Captain Fowler dies in 1897 from apoplexy at the age of 70, long after attending many 13th Club dinners. So, he doesn't die from the curse or anything. Now, the superstition against 13 goes back to ancient times. According to the book Holiday Folklore, Phobias, and Fun, an ancient maritime tradition, which, by the way, I didn't know none of this. I was surprised. No voyage could be begin on a Friday because sailors believed that bad luck would fall on the ship. Lord Byron purposely tested this superstition by sailing for Greece on a Friday, and he died in that country. During the 1800s, the stigma against sailing on Friday the 13th was so prevalent that Lloyd's of London refused to insure any ship sailing on that date. Even among the military, if for some reason a ship was scheduled to leave port on the 13th, whether it was a Friday or not, somehow it would contrive to leave after midnight. So in other words, technically, it wasn't sailing on the 13th. An old farmer's almanac described where the town father of a little town called French Lick Springs in Indiana decreed that all black cats in town had to wear bells on Friday the 13th. Once upon a time, there were French socialites known as quatorziens, or 14ers, which were called upon in an emergency to add a guest for a dinner party, when it unexpectedly had only 13 attendees. In other words, if you're somebody having a dinner, and for some reason, people don't show up, somebody begs out, and my God, you have 13 guests, you would call up one of these 14er ladies and tell them, help, which I'm sure you had to pay them for this besides the dinner. So this was how prevalent this superstition was. In other words, it wasn't just the host or hostess. It was that the people that you had sitting down would be like, oh, no, I'm leaving. I'm not going to be one of 13 to eat dinner because I'm going to die in a year. So basically, this was, talk about, a side gig. That's the ultimate side gig where these women would get called to round out a dinner party. Now, there's many skyscrapers that don't have a 13th floor. Hotels and hospitals avoid having a room 13. Okay, now the Greeks and the Romans regarded 13 as a sign of destruction. In early Rome, witches gathered in groups of 12, and the 13th member was the devil. In Norse mythology, there was a legend where 12 gods gathered for a meal when Loki, the red-haired evildoer and spirit of strife, sneaked in uninvited. He tricked Hodor, the blind god of darkness, to kill Baldur the Beautiful, the god of joy and gladness. Upon the death of Baldur, darkness fell throughout the universe and the whole earth. From then on, number 13 has been considered ominous. The Vikings made their hangmans loose with 13 knots. So my point being, it's across cultures. Now, according to the 15th century sorcerers, walking around your house 13 times made you safe all day on Friday the 13th by chasing evil spirits away. So back even the 15th century, we're talking 1400s, whatever, there was this fear of Friday the 13th. Now, folklore from 1696 instructed that those who wanted to keep sinister beings from doing you harm on the 13th should hang their shoes out the window. That part I don't get. Judas Iscariot, who would betray Christ, was the 13th to arrive at the Last Supper. The simplest solution to be safe during Friday the 13th is to walk around the block with your mouth full of water without swallowing it until you are finished. I don't get that one either. But, however, the 13th was not always seen as a portent of ill luck. Two important buildings to the nation were started on the 13th. George Washington laid the cornerstone for the White House on October 13th, 1792. The cornerstone for the Supreme Court was laid on the same date, October 13th of 1932. Fear of Friday the 13th is called, I'm going to try to pronounce this, parakevidemia. catriphobia. It's a long ass. Which can range from nervousness to full blown panic attacks. My point being that there is even a name for the phobia of Friday the 13th. In other words, there's people that it's just not like, hey, there's people that this, and I was reading up on this, that really start like getting anxious. Like if, let's say, Friday the 13th, they'd be like, I'm going to stay home. I'm not going to go out. They'd be like anxious, like, and I'd walk around the block with my mouth full of water and I'd swallow it, hang my shoes out, the whole 9 yards. There's people that they really, so much so that the phobia has a name, has been given a name. So I thought that was really interesting, believe it or not, because um, you always think of, this being like a quaint superstition and maybe, like kids to scare kids. And you now realize there's a lot of adults walking around that really believe in it. So I'm going to turn the next story over to my wingman, Henry, so he can do his weird tales from the up there in the Northeast.
Short or long?
No, do the one about that French part of New York.
Oh, I had a friend in New York. He was a cop in New York, Charlie, and every now and then he would call me and ask me if I wanted to go hang out with him when he was gonna see a lot of weird crap, and I would just tag along. If I wasn't working, I would just go, and they didn't know I was a cop too, so I would just go like a ride along, and I would see some really messed up stuff. And then when he called me, he said, "You want to see like New Orleans voodoo in New York?" I go, "That's BS. There's no such thing." He goes, "No, there's this very small community, like not even a block long. There's only like 50 families that live there, and because the Jamaicans hate the Haitians, but this was like Creole French, not Haitian, Creole French. They moved from New Orleans to New York, and they brought their voodoo culture to New York. So they were like maybe like a block away from from Jamaica, Queens, and high side you will not even know, not at all. The majority of the people there that live there were either Catholic or like very very high practicing, um, uh, not Catholic.
Yeah, but they were religious. In other words, they
Yeah,
were.
yeah. They were no, they very frowned on that. Um, but when we went to check it out, it was that the families who called the cops
Right.
disappeared.
That's not good.
They disappeared, and we we knocked on the doors, and there was two families. We knocked on the doors and everything, and nothing. And we said, look, let's take a shot. People usually leave key under the door or something, and we went in. The house looked like it was like a mob hit, and they cleaned the house.
Oh,
No,
this is the people that disappeared.
yeah,
Okay.
there was nothing, no blood on the floor, nothing. I mean, it looked so clean that you could eat off the floor, not even dust. And he was like weirded out. He's like, what the hell? And we were able to talk to a couple of the neighbors, and they said that they had a falling out with the Voodoo family, and these people went back like 6 generations, like seriously practicing stuff. And when we talked to them, they said that they had a falling out because they were like smell in the backyard, because when they did their animal rituals, they would bury the pots in their backyard,
Okay.
like goat heads, all kinds of like really messed up stuff. And one time they actually even killed a horse in the backyard.
So, well, what happened? Everybody, the neighbors just wanted to leave them alone, like they didn't like it, and what they were
No,
just like.
the name, see, and Haitian or Creole French are like terrified of voodoo. They're very superstitious, and they will not. If you put like a dead cat in front of their house, they'll move. They don't even leave the furniture. They will move. The next day, the door will be open and they'll be gone because they're that superstitious about it. And they were like terrified to talk about it. But this like older French lady, she was so mad that she was just battling on and threw everybody under the bus.
Yeah, she got so old she didn't give a crap, and she's
No,
like, forget
she was
it.
like 70 something years old.
All right.
And she was just tired because, and it's understandable. They paid a lot of money for their house,
Right.
and they would just wanted to be left alone. They moved from New Orleans to New York to avoid that kind of crap. So she said that they were actually like people were paying them to do rituals,
Ah, that's why they were so.
and she said that they didn't like the fact that they were torturing animals, and they were like using animals to put hexes on people and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And they were afraid that bad juju will end up coming in their neighborhood to their house because it was only 3 houses away from them.
Right.
So
Well, whichever way you look at it, even if you don't scare that.
But at the end of the day, no body, no crime.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it took us a while because those people would not open the door. They were very rude, and they didn't realize that my friend Charlie was real French. I mean, second generation, born in New York, but understood fluent French. And when they told him to F off, he told them back, open the effing door. And went like this, and they go, that SH doesn't mean anything to me. So he goes, 1 second. And then he was so fed up, he kicked the door. He goes, we're coming in. And when we went in, the husband came. The husband was a little more cooperative.
But what was it? He wanted to talk to them because what? Because
of all that stuff that people were saying, and they wanted to get at least talk to out of the horse's mouth, like what's going on, like
did he really suspect that they had anything to do with the family disappearing, or did he think that
no,
they had moved
people,
away?
Okay, if the people were there 2 days ago.
Oh, okay.
And the guy was going to work, and the guy had a really, really good job.
Okay.
And the wife was a professor in NYU, and they had really good jobs. And all of a sudden, 2 days later, they're gone.
I get it. Okay, I understand now.
So when we went inside the house was, it looked like something like Stephen King meets Rob Zombie. I mean, right. Like, you're like, what the? And we were walking in, and I didn't want to touch anything. Because, see, my mom was a spiritualist.
Uh-huh.
And she always said, when you go into places like that, do not touch anything. Because something in there, that bad juju will pick it back on you, and you'll never get rid of it. So I had my hands in my pocket. I have my hands so far down my pants that I look like Al Bundy. And my friend was like, crap, I remember this. And when we got to the living room, there was a desiccated, stuffed human body.
Holy crap. What?
Standing in the corner.
All right.
And I almost threw up. I'm like, what the fuck?
Did you really think it was real? Because probably I would probably think it was like that's not real.
No. I had to ask. I go, is that? They go, yeah, it was donated to us. I'm like, that's BS because nobody will donate a human body for you to desiccate and use it as a prop.
You'd be surprised, but yeah, but still.
Okay. And my friend told me, he goes, that's probably one of their victims, but we don't have no proof. That's probably a trophy.
No, but they sometimes do raid cemeteries and do take.
And he goes, that's probably a trophy. It looks too well done to be somebody who was pulled out of the ground, or it looked like something out of that was mummified, like perfectly
Like
mummified.
desiccated, like that. That.
Yeah, where the body changes color already,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not rotting because there's nothing in it anymore.
Right. Yeah. 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 That's. Yeah.
And
That it's not rotting because it's desiccated.
yeah,
Ugh.
all there is, and what looked like the eyes were it looked like the eyes were real, and
Can you imagine?
and like pieces of hair were falling off, and they had then they had a circle in the middle of the ground,
Mm-hmm.
in the middle of the living room, and they had, remember, like I told you, like my godfather,
Yes.
they had um giant 6 foot.
But these people that you're talking about, but they weren't literally your godfather. They were just saying, but they weren't literally.
Yeah, they weren't like
So anyway, yeah, keep going. So here you're thinking, okay,
yeah, and they had saints all over the living room,
okay,
6 foot saints.
okay, because they were santeros.
Huh?
They were santeros.
No, because they do that too.
Right, right, right. But you're telling me what this was the same, but not the same.
No, but not the same, because they had like things with apples and all kinds of stuff in there too, and they were like giving offerings to a lot of stuff.
But what was the vibe that you got when you went into to these people's place?
To not go in. And but the thing about it is, everything that they said that the people didn't like them because their religion was against their religion. So they were going, but it was like a thing going back and forth because they would call the cops on them because of what they were doing, and because and they were like falling back on freedom of religion, so the cops couldn't do anything.
So what did this guy Charlie? Did he ask him any? What did he ask him about the?
He asked them. He asked them, did they know anything about what happened to those families? And they said that they didn't like them and they didn't care what happened to them, and everybody needs to mind their own business. And we went back and it was like a going back and forth,
Mm-hmm.
and he was getting upset, and then he had to like put a earmark on that file because and hand it over to somebody else because he was already like before I went with him, he was going back and forth for about a few weeks, and it was nothing, and they didn't. And since there was nothing, they told him that he needed to actually focus on something else because unless without any proof, they couldn't do anything about it.
So in other words, these people that
They
complain,
got away with it. In other words,
they did. In other words, that yeah, like nobody, no crime.
yeah,
They complain about the New Orleans voodoo people, and all of a sudden they disappear.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And since they could never find any blood, they couldn't find anything. They didn't have nothing to hold those people or even take them in for questioning. They could have been. It could have been like what the husband said. It could be a number of things. You guys are blaming it on us, but those people could have moved. It's been a number of things. Why do it automatically have to be us because of our religion? So he used that card.
Yeah. Right. Like, yeah, you're picking on us because whatever.
Because our religion does conflicts with your beliefs.
And by the way, that thing that you were describing, that body and everything, that had that. If you read on some of the things that Aleister Crowley did, which of course he was a crazy, crazy wicked guy, he was doing something like that along those lines. But yeah, see, those are the. You know what? Everybody forgets that this was pre-DNA time. Because nowadays, when people disappear or somebody says, I don't know, if they can find DNA tie-in, they can have something to go with.
They have that spray.
The luminol.
And they could bait that whole place, and they would have found something.
Right, but this was from what you're telling me, this was pre-DNA.
Yeah, that was.
And again,
like 88, 89.
No body, no crime. No. To us, we look at it from a different angle, but from them, it's like, hey, people. Which, by the way, a lot of people that have disappeared, or even they've gone missing. Initially, the family have a hard time getting the cops to even put out a missing persons report or to convince the cops that there was foul play involved, because they'll tell you if this person is an adult and they want to up and leave and not tell anybody where they went or who they're with or what they're doing, they as an adult, okay, can do that. In other words, that unless you can provide some proof of why you think that this person met with, something bad, you're lucky if they'll take a missing persons report. But outside of that, and a lot of people that supposedly, I've read stories, true crime stories, where people that the family assumed, kind of a shoddy family, assumed that so and so was living in California or on the other side of the country. Turns out that they find their bodies later on. And again, nothing was ever done about it at the time of their disappearance because of that whole thing of what you were talking about.
And even though their car was still in their driveway, in their garage, her purse was still on the table, and his briefcase was still there. Didn't pull up any red flags. Now they would have.
No, but I'm surprised. But then this is New York, and I know there's New Yorkers going, hey, 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 but I don't care. This was, again, I'm sure that those departments were overloaded with cases, and unless somebody said, hey, I saw them do this to them, or like you said, blood or something, it wasn't going to go anywhere fast.
If it was today, they had cameras, it would have been a different story.
Okay, but same thing. By the way, I'm going to interject my 2 cents worth in that I was saying about DNA. DNA is great, but I'm waiting because it solved a bunch of cold cases, and of course, it kind of like, when there's a doubt about whether this person really did commit this crime, the DNA kind of seals the case. But I'm waiting for the point where they get to the point where they can replicate DNA. Or in other words, just because you find DNA at a scene does not mean somebody, like a defense attorney, can turn around and say, well, you know what? There's ways where they can replicate DNA and place it at a scene. I don't think we're there yet, but I see it coming down the pike, where all the advances of the DNA will kind of be like, it's not going to be that surefire thing where it's going to be like, oh, your DNA was there, that's it, you're guilty, come this way, that kind of deal. So, yeah. But anyway, but yes, not all, what? Because, and that's another thing, and me and Henry have talked about this, because, all these shows that they put on, either the old ones or the new ones, they always put like all these, even the, those ID channels that, they have all the crimes and everything. They always present all the cases that get solved, even if it takes sometimes a few years, especially, there's shows that are the cold case and stuff like that. They always present the cases that get solved. But there's a ton of cases that never get solved. Sometimes they don't even have victims that get identified. Okay? Sometimes they know the perpetrator, they can't even know who the victim is, or vice versa. They identify the victim, but they can never, like, in other words, the perpetrator gets away with it. All right? In other words, you never know, did this person live into old age? Did they die prematurely? Did they serve time for another crime? That's what I'm saying. It's very misleading when people see all these shows thinking that all these cases, especially as something as heinous as murder, ends up getting resolved. They don't. But anyway, let's get back to the Friday the 13th thing. And I'm going to tell you now, this story, to talk about the bad luck, this is something that, yeah, definitely this guy, the curse of the bad luck, basically hit him like I don't know what you want to call it, but that's pretty bad. So this is back in this was in the 1920s, and this is in France, by the way. All right, now starts out, there's 2 officers of the bicycle police brigade of this little town called Fresnes-sur-Marne, which were patrolling the road to Clay when they came in the night upon a smoldering hayrick in a field belonging to Farmer Ernay. Now, under the rick, about 100 feet off the main road and up a cart rack, they smelled the odor of burning flesh. It was the body of a slender girl. She was slightly charred along one side. Now, this occurred on August 13th, 1926, a Friday. The police in the French city of Fresnes-sur-Marne were trying to solve what was dubbed by the press as the Friday the 13th murder. Now, the body was of the young girl, which was found. She was strangled, and the fire was assumed to have been started to conceal the crime. Now, a man was seen driving a red automobile that stopped at a roadside cafe on the Paris Meaux highway. He was supposed to be the murderer. These was like a countryside outside on the outskirts of Paris. This, remember, this is back in the 1920s. Now, initially, the victim's name was not known. The only clue was a laundry mark on the partially burned clothing. She was well dressed and looked to be in her early 20s. Now, it seemed this girl had stopped at a nearby roadside diner, and the proprietress, Madame Lambeau, said the girl had come to the establishment and told her a story in which a fortune teller had warned her that something terrible would happen to her on the 13th. But she laughed and said she wasn't worried. Her companion was a man about 45 years of age, and they were traveling in a red-brown Delage. Delage, I think, is some type of automobile that was around in France at that time. Now, Madame Lambeau described the girl as beautiful with gray-green eyes, and her hair was bobbed in the latest style. She was gay and had even danced with her daughter. Remember, this is the 1920s, the gay 20s, flappers. Now, less than a week later, the identities of the man and the girl were established. The police were combing Paris for a wealthy broker named Gaston Guillot for the murder of Marie-Louise Boulaguet. Her nickname was Malou, who was a Paris telephone operator. It was determined she had died by strangulation. Now, Guillot was supposedly a purported millionaire and the son of the mayor of Provence. This is a little town on the outskirts, again, in the countryside outside of Paris. Right away, he was under suspicion for being a Bluebeard and killing his two wives, each which had died suddenly after being stricken seriously while on auto trips with him in the mountains. He escaped police from his Paris apartment, leaving a letter to his 16-year-old daughter, Madeleine, and the concierge that he was innocent and declaring he would commit suicide before being taken. Now, he was captured on August 20th, a week later, at Neu. It's a suburb of Paris. Now, this guy he was one-eyed. He was the one-eyed fugitive. Instead of the one-eyed fugitive, the one-eyed fugitive. He had a glass eye due to an injury from the war. And he was caught leaving a hotel on the Boulevard Montparnasse after sending a letter to police that they would never capture him. Wrong. Now, he admitted to giving the girl a ride in his limousine and that he was her companion at the diner. Now, the police, at this point, they theorized that he was planning to contract a rich marriage, and the girl stood in his way. Turned out she's 20 years old, and she had been his mistress for 2 years. Now, he paid for her apartment at 99 Avenue du General Michel Bizot, which was 3 doors away from his own home. How convenient. Now, the investigation into Malou's murder had the Paris police take a close look at the death of his 2 wives. This is why I'm saying this Friday the 13th thing. Besides getting nabbed, this is all downhill from there. Now, what it turns out is in 1921, 5 years before, Guillot takes his first wife, named Augusta, to this place called Candeville-le-Haut to visit her cousins, the Recouvert. Now, the story circulated at that time was that she died suddenly. She took ill and she died suddenly. Now, the police this is, by the way, throughout the story, you get the idea that the Paris police are sharper and they're doing a real good investigation. So Paris police go to speak to the cousin, a man named Martin Recouvert. Now, and he says about his cousin's suicide, quote, Guillot and Augusta occupied a room upstairs. We sleep on the first floor. In the evening before Augusta's death, Guillot and I had a conversation which has since impressed me. I met him in the courtyard near the well and he stopped me. Is it wise to leave the lid of the well open? He asked me, and I said, sort of joking, why not? There are no children here. None of us is going to jump in, I hope. I don't know about that, said Guillot with a strange expression. Then he told him his wife was a neurasthenic. Now, this term was used by the alienist or psychiatrist of the day to describe a person with an exhausted central nervous system. In other words, I guess an anxious person. Strangely, even though Augusta Guillot was found with a bullet in her head, her cousins heard no shot. and attributed to the thick walls of the farmhouse. Now, this the cousin, he tells the police how Guillaume had appeared like a ghost at the bedroom door sometime after midnight and calmly announced, "What I feared has happened. Augusta has killed herself. I never had any suspicions of Guillaume. The police doctor showed me how my cousin had probably lain in bed with a pistol hid under the clothes waiting for her husband to sleep so that she could kill herself without interference. Augusta was the mother of his daughter." So here, you know, they take it as like, oh, she's a neurasthenic. She's kind of suicidal. Goes to bed with him, pulls out a gun and shoots herself when they're in bed. And they take it all like in stride, like, oh, okay. So a few years later, Guillaume remarries, and he now marries this lady called Georgette Barbichon. She's a widow, but then she too suddenly dies 5 months after they get married. All right. Again, the story that he gives out is that she took sick during an auto trip while visiting the Côte d'Azur. Now, after this, he moves to Paris. His daughter attends a boarding school and part of the time lives with his father, or the paternal grandfather, in the provinces. However, at the time of the investigation, she had come to spend the holiday with her father. Now, you can tell our birds decide that they have to put in their 2 cents, 5 cents, whatever worth. Why not, right? Anyway, he tells the magistrate, okay, this is Guillaume. He tells the magistrate, he's been arrested. So he tells the magistrate that he met Malou or Marie Louise in May of 1925 in Paris. That she worked as a telephone operator and that he would meet this young woman who was only a few years older than his daughter every 2 weeks in Paris. And he said that she had this detestable character and accused her of having other lovers in the country and in Paris. So in other words, he's doing the setup of in other words, it could be a cast of thousands, of hundreds, because she's involved with other men. Now, he explains that what precipitated the death of Malou was an argument they had. She told him that she had an offer of marriage and that if he didn't marry her, she would accept the other offer. Now, the dispute escalates, and he says at one time during the argument, which had become very violent, she slapped me several times, and I retaliated with a pretty stiff punch. Starting my car, I seized her by the throat and squeezed it violently. She cried out like a polecat and all of a sudden fainted. I saw her stiffen my arms with her head leaning back, so I felt her pulse and I found that her heart had ceased to beat. I again started my car, and several miles further on I saw in a field a large haystack. I drove my car near to it and dragged the body of Marie Louise and placed it against the stack. I then threw a match into the hay, then I hurried back to Paris. So he's kind of admitting, but not really. He's saying we have an argument. She's slapping him around because she gets mad, and he just wigs out, and basically strangles her with one hand. Now, Guillaume changes the reason for the argument. Now he changes the story, saying that Malou is madly jealous of his daughter, and that she's been pressing him to marry her, but he agrees to only after his daughter gets married. In other words, he's stalling for time, and I guess Malou had a breakdown, or I don't know. So, new story. Now, it turns out that after they had just missed him that day, all right, the one that turned him over to the police was his own father, because his father is a very upright citizen. He's the mayor of this little town of Provence, and he's believing that his son is innocent. So he tells him, tells the police this is where to find him, thinking you need to straighten this out and tell the police the truth. So when his father finds out that he confessed to the murder, even though with all these things, that he was very ashamed. All right. So then again, the Paris police start digging into the information about the death of his second wife. Now, it turns out she dies in Monte Carlo, the famous Monte Carlo for the gambling, in a place called the Hotel de Vichy. Guillaume tells her family that she had died of influenza. Remember, these are the times that influenza had been around. But that the Monaco authorities held an inquest at which the conclusion was reached that death was due to poison, probably self-administered. And that members of the family, now the family of the second wife, they're being questioned now in real time after he's been arrested. And they're telling police that Before Guillot and her had started on this trip, he had persuaded them to sign a paper relinquishing all claims to a share of his wife's estate in the event of any ill befalling her on the journey, in consideration of $200, and the estate was worth 2,000. In other words, he gave him £200. They signed it over on an estate that was worth £2,000. They go off to Monte Carlo, and all of a sudden she mysteriously dies. Nobody asks questions. Now at this point, the Paris police decide to hold an official inquiry in connection with the death of the two wives, besides the murder of Malou. And it comes to light that both of his wives were shot dead with a revolver, although none of the members of their families knew the truth of their deaths. Guillot told the parents of his first wife she committed suicide, poison. Now, he tells the parents of the second one that she died from influenza or a heart attack, when in truth, she was found shot in that hotel in Monte Carlo, where, owing to the authorities' dislike for any publicity in case of a supposed suicide, it was easy for the husband to obtain a death certificate. Guillot told his friend she killed herself because she had lost a great deal of money at the casino gambling tables. So in other words, it's almost like he planned it. He takes her to this hotel in Monte Carlo where they do a lot of gambling, and I guess people are known for like doing away with themselves, but they don't want any of that bad publicity of people killing themselves. So I'm sure he shot her, but he puts out, look, she shot herself, and the authorities in Monte Carlo are like, what do you need? A death certificate? Here you are, sir. Bye. Get out of here, but don't say anything about the suicide, okay? He tells her poor family, well, I don't know, had signed over her estate, okay? Tells them this story. None of it. They don't find out till he's under suspicion for murder. Now, also among this, he's charged with attempting to set fire to the crops. This is when he sets the hayrick on fire. Now, in France, this is an offense that's punishable with penal servitude for life. Okay, later he denies this, saying he had just emptied his pipe and that the fire was accidental. Because apparently, I guess in France at that time, if you set fire to like a wheat field, this was basically you were interfering with the food production. They took this thing seriously out there in the countryside in France. So what they do is they exhume the girl's body, Marie-Louise, and they examine her again, and it shows that she'd been subjected to considerable violence. Her nose and her arms were badly bruised, and her throat was fractured. And the bodies of his former wives were also exhumed. Now, the bad luck of killing his last victim on Friday the 13th grew exponentially when, again, he's being looked at not only for the murder of Malou and his two wives, they're looking at him for the death of a young girl 15 years before at a little town called Troban, which is where his father had lived. The girl was strangled at the time when Guillot was doing his military service there, and she'd been raped. Okay, so in other words, they're doing their version of looking at every cold case that he could be connected to and hanging it on him. So, August 28th, this is, 2 weeks later, he goes out to the countryside. This is 25 miles outside of Paris. And he goes with the magistrate, with the courts, and he reenacts the scene that led to the death of Malou. And 1,500 attendees bring picnic lunches out there to this countryside to like watch this scenario where he's walking around, okay, and basically he's reenacting. And if you see in a lot of the slides, this, you see him walking around, and he's there. Like, in other words, I hate to say it, you hear some of these serial killers that get all like they like it when they get the attention, even though they're putting the noose around their neck. That attention, does that narcissism comes out. So anyway, well, it's just as a contrast. While this is going on in France, Ruta Valentino dies here in the United States, and but even so, this murder in France made headlines all over the world, including the United States. And then for a few days, when Rudy Valentino dies, all suddenly, son of Sheikh, whatever, he gets displaced, but right away he comes back. Now, the authorities, they find out later that Guillot and this young mistress he has, they had a very troubled relationship, and that they argued a lot. Now, he wrote several letters before to a friend where he said, quote, Marie Louise can desert me if she likes, but I cannot desert her. You know why. Now, in all of this murder investigation, they're trying to figure out what is the motive for killing her. Okay, first, like I said, they think, okay, he wants her out of the way because he wants to do something. He's saying it was a crime of passion. We got into a fight and I strangled her with one hand. But they're still trying to figure out what is the reason really. Because a lot of the, I guess it's in French and anywhere, they're saying, if she's a mistress, why don't you just cast her off? You know, you've been with her a couple of years. Now you want to marry somebody and the mistress in the way, just tell her, hey, bye. Stop paying her apartment and bye. So they can't figure out why this ended up being a murder. So now with the case of the second wife, what it turns out, and I did not know that, apparently in France, there was a statute of limitation. I don't know if it's on murder or questioning. So the statute of limitation on the first wife death had come and gone. But the second wife, all right, in those years, it had run out for the murder of the first wife, but the second one, no. Now, because Georgette, the second wife, she had died in February of 1925. And by then, Malou was already his sweetheart. They wondered what was the secret that his mistress knew about him. Now, bad luck of the 13th continues to get to him. Now, fast forward into September, and he was accused of the following crimes, I'm telling you. The murder of his two wives, which he explains as suicides. Killing of a mail carrier on the highway by running over him with his auto and leaving the scene. 3. Assault and the murder of a 15-year-old in the fields near his father's home at Louan, near Meaux. 4. Seduction of scores of young girls of peasant families, many who mysteriously disappeared and were acquaintances of his first wife. Because that's one thing, both of his wives were from the countryside. They weren't Parisians. All right. Number 5, that he set fire to the wheat crops. Number 6, that he participated in the robbery of $1.5 million francs from the Paris Belfort Express in February 1926. In other words, he held up a train. 7, a railway robbery in 1921. And 8, dozens of crimes of criminal arson. Okay, this, talk about the gift that keeps on giving. Now, by November, all right, this is 3 months later, it's evident that they find out this guy had this reputation of being a millionaire speculator. It turns out that this was not real, that he had all these lavish expenditures, but all the time he was asking his parents for money. Now, and that he was in debt in excess of 1 million francs. Now, it turns out that in July of 1921, this is a few weeks before the death of his first wife, there's what they call a combination train that's consisting of passengers and freight cars, and it gets held up about 1 mile from Louan. Remember, Louan is this area where his family's from, by a party of automobile bandits in concert with Confederates who had taken passage in the train. The robbery occurs on the one day of the month when the baggage car of this local train carried payroll sacks. Now, the robbers took 500,000 francs, and it was theorized it was masterminded by someone familiar with local affairs. In other words, someone that knew that timing was everything. At the time the police followed without success a report that Guillot was seen to jump from the train 30 minutes after the robbery when it had resumed its trip and entering the station at Louan. In 1921, 1923, 1924, and 1925, the Louan Brigade, or the police from Louan, investigated suspicious fires, which destroyed stored crops. Guillot was under suspicion as all the victims were clients of his Paris grain jobbing house. The local police believed that Guillot and his clients had set the fires for the purpose of recovering insurance. Over 10 million francs were paid out to the insured. So this guy was doing crimes which were bringing in a lot of money. So I don't know what he was doing with his money, but whatever. So at this time, all right, he's being compared to this serial killer in France that had gotten executed a few years before named Landreau, who was also called the Bluebeard. He had been guillotined after he was condemned for the murder of 11 women, all of them his wives or girlfriends. So Here's finally Guillot goes to what they call the Assize, or the courts. This is in July of 1927, almost a year later after the murder. And the doctors testify that Malou, or the girl, had not been dead when she was thrown into the hay rick and set on fire, as some fumes had been found in her lungs, but later this was challenged by another doctor. In other words, saying he thought he had strangled her to death, but maybe she was unconscious, and when he throws her and puts her on fire, she wasn't really dead, but that killed her. So there's another man, his name is Dr. Paul. Now, he's performed more than 34,000 autopsies, and he starts to challenge Guillot's description of how he strangled her with one hand while he's driving, while they're quarreling. There's another doctor called Dr. Halloween who examines the girl's body with Dr. Paul, and they determined this girl had not died within a few minutes. In other words, there had been a long struggle. She had bruises on her arms, and there were marks that showed where she was in a face-to-face struggle, and that he had used both of his hands, and she was killed by standing up, not sitting down, because he was kind of saying he's reaching over and strangling her with one hand while he's driving. Now, this was called an affaire passionnelle, even though Guillot was unfaithful to his own mistress with several women. The judge, who presides over the trial, asks him about the death of his two wives, even though he's not on trial for that, but he asks him about it. And Guillot said that his first wife killed herself because she thought she had cancer, another story, and that his second wife because of her gambling losses. And the judge responds, generally, when destiny commences to rain blows on a man, it shows more ingenuity. In other words, this is a load of BS. So, comes out during the trial that Guillot wanted to get rid of his mistress because he had plans to marry the sister of one of his two wives who had money. His lack of funds always coincided with the so-called suicide of his wives, who with their death left him flush with money again. So they start looking at his debts, or when he needed money, and coincidentally he's in debt and a wife gets killed. And now he's out to marry a sister-in-law. I'm not sure if it was, I think it was a sister of his second wife, which I guess these people had some type of land or something. Lucky her, she dodged the bullet. So, and they look at his upbringing and they're saying he hadn't suffered. There was no reason for him. He was the son of a rich and respectable farmer. He had inherited a small fortune from his mother when she died. And he moves to Paris and indulges in all this debauchery. Because while he's got Marie Louise as a mistress, he carries on an affair with his own servant and his brother's widow. Okay? So he's planning eventually to marry his dead wife's sister. But at the same time, while he has this young girl, he's in his 40s, by the way, he's also having an affair with his servant and with his brother's widow. And he boasts of conquering hundreds of other women. By the time he's discovered as a cold-blooded killer, he had spent his fortune of over 2 million francs. Remember, this is 1926. 2 million francs is a lot of money by those standards. Yes. Oh, no. A lot more. I never figured it out. Like, you know how they do the conversions, how much money 100 years later that is? But it's a fortune. So, July 22nd, 1927, almost a year to the date of the murder, he's found guilty and sentenced to death. And the courts award 50,000 francs to Malou's mother. All right? Now, the death sentence it's appealed by his attorney. All right? Which is what they do in most, cases, even here in the United States where there's a death conviction, they appeal it. And it's surprising because they do this story where he makes this list of killers who are known to be kind to animals, because it became known that he has showered his dogs with care and affection despite killing people. It's like one of these oxymoronic things. So, November 1927, they deny his appeal for clemency. And remember, this is a death sentence to be carried out. These were the years that France still used the guillotine. So he's public guillotine. So, fast forward, now it's January of 1928. And the president, there's a new president comes into France, and he commutes his sentence to life imprisonment on Devil's Island. All right? Now, the American press, and some of you might have seen the slide, the American press start making fun of this because they're saying that the French commuted his sentence from death to going to Devil's Island because it was a passion affair, because he was considered a romantic murderer. Okay, the American press made fun of that because they were saying, this guy killed her, and you guys know he killed her. But to be honest with you, in those years, a sentence to the going to Devil's Island in the French Guiana was in effect a death sentence. But in his case, he considered it was better than being beheaded in public. And by the way, that prison, the Devil's Island, it was opened in 1852 and was notorious for the harsh treatment of the guards and the diseases produced by the tropical climate. It had a death rate of 75%. In other words, you weren't the people were given their sentences with X amount of years, but it became a death sentence even if you were there for 10 years because of the high rate of disease. Now, after he gets he gets sentenced to go to Devil's Island. That's it. He drops from the radar. Nobody ever knows what happens with him. Like, does he die in Devil's Island? Nothing else is found out about that. So talk about how this guy, everything, basically the one thing that he got a break, if you want to call it that, was when they reprieve him from, instead of being beheaded in public with a guillotine, they sent him to Devil's Island. But everything, all these other crimes that he had done, that he was being looked at, everything, once that Friday the 13th crime happened, I'm telling you, talk about that. That makes you believe in superstition as to why he ended up being looked at for all these other things, and all this truth came out. And again, they never were quite sure why he got rid of this girl, why he killed her. Because again, they were saying, why didn't he just cast her off? I guess this was very norm, an older man in Paris has his young mistress, and when either you grew tired of her or you had something to do, you wanted to get married, you just said, hey, it's over. And the only thing that they could come up with is that she knew something about either his murders or things that he had done. Either she was around or he had talked to her about him. That he had held up these trains, all this, basically, when he was with his clients, they were doing insurance fraud. So they were thinking that really the real reason wasn't a fight, and it wasn't because he wanted to get rid of her, it's because she knew something. Besides the fact that because let's say if he did want to marry his sister-in-law, again, all he had to tell her was, hey, Malu, sorry, it's over. So they're thinking that she had something on him that he had to kill her over. So there you go. And that's what happened to the poor Malu girl. I'm telling you, when you look at these things that you go, wow, sometimes, and this guy, he, considering everything, if you think about it, right up to that time, his luck had been pretty good. His luck had been like right up there. So let's see if let me see if I can find this is see if I this is some other weird stuff when you look at it and you say, well, you know what, and I really don't know what are the laws of averages when you say certain things happening on the 13th, that you could say, do other bad things happen on the on other days that are not the 13th, and people just decide that, hey, it's the 13th? Like, what are the laws of averages? Is it because something the 13th? But let's find out. Okay, these are some bad things that have happened on the 13th. This is on July 13th, 1951, Friday, July 13th, 1951. After 4 days of record-setting rain fell in northeastern Kansas, swollen rivers poured over their banks, consuming the cities of Topeka, Lawrence, and Manhattan in the process. Scientists can't still explain it. Okay. Yeah, apparently, let me go back up to the top on this. Okay. All right. Let's see. Yeah, this is talk. Okay, Friday the 13th. This is, a lot of people are familiar with this. Friday the 13th, 1307. This is when the French rounded up thousands of Knights Templars and tortured them as heretics. Some wondered whether this was the beginning of the whole Friday the 13th mythology. Maybe. Okay, but that's pretty coincidental. October the 13th, 1307. Okay. Then Friday, November 13th, 1829, 10,000 people gathered to watch Sam Patch jump into New York's Genesee River from atop the Genesee Falls. Only weeks earlier, he'd leaped off Niagara Falls, which was a massive tunnel underneath it, by the way, and into the Niagara River and survived. He wasn't lucky this time. That's incredible. You jump off the... You jump... I'm telling you, talk about a death wish. You jump from... You jump from the Niagara Falls, which, by the way, thousands, hundreds of people have died, either by mistake or committing suicide by jumping off Niagara Falls.
In a barrel.
In the barrel, but it's like the Golden Gate Bridge. There's some type of romanticism tied into it about the like, if I want to commit suicide, let me not go off by myself somewhere. I want to do it in a place where, anyway, you just survive it, and then you go and you test it, and I'm telling you, see,
a lot of people that jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge, the ones that survived ended up crippled.
No, yeah, there was people don't realize that if you change your mind on the way down, yeah. So, the other one, Friday the 13th, 1972, a plane crash in the Andes. 12 people died instantly, and survivors resorted to cannibalism. You probably didn't know these things are considered bad luck. Wow, I didn't know that. I was aware. As a matter of fact, this plane crash and the cannibalism is very famous, but I didn't know that it had occurred on Friday the 13th. Okay, that same day in Russia, which I take it is October the 13th, 1972, 174 people were killed when a Russian airliner crashed on landing near Moscow. Friday the 13th is just the start. Wow, okay. Now, August the 13th, 2010, a 13-year-old boy in Suffolk, England is struck by lightning. The lightning reportedly hit at 1:13 p.m. or 13:13 in military time. The boy survived unharmed, but if I were him, I would stay under my bed the next the 13th. Okay, October 13th, Friday, October 13th, 2006. Nearly 500,000 people lost power when Buffalo, New York, and the surrounding suburbs were buried under 22 to 24 inches of snow. Western New York is used to a lot of snow, but 24 inches in October? Okay, researchers still can't explain what happened. October the 13th, Friday, 1989. Stock market falls 6.91%. At the time, it was the second worst day in market history. Definitely an unlucky day. Well, everybody knows about Halloween and with a great stock market crash in 1929. Okay, Friday, July 13th, 1979. Bob Renfrey decides to stay in bed every subsequent Friday the 13th because of a spate of bad luck he'd suffered on that unlucky day, such as walking through a plate glass door, getting fired, and putting his wife in the hospital after hitting her in the head with a stick meant for the dog. Another Friday the 13th saw his wife fall down a flight of stairs. I'm sorry, I'm laughing because some of these things, you look at them, but I could see why this man decides, I'm not getting out of bed. Okay, Friday the 13th, I mentioned this one at the beginning. July 13th, 1951, after days of record-setting rain fell in northeastern Kansas, swollen rivers poured over the banks, consuming the cities of Topeka, Lawrence, and Manhattan in the process. Okay, January 13th, 2012, the cruise ship Costa Concordia partially sank off the Italian coast after running aground, killing 32 people. By the way, I do remember this, but see, that's the things. When you hear them, you don't make that connection that it occurred on a Friday the 13th. Okay, on Friday the April 13th, 2029, in the future, asteroid 99942 Apophis is forecast to pass to Earth a scant 18,000 miles away, closer than any of the satellites that we've put in orbit. Okay. Now, on every Friday the 13th, the world's economy apparently loses about $900 million because people are afraid to work and travel on this date, says Donald Dassey, founder of the Stress Management Center and Phobia Institute. Okay, remember I mentioned that thing about that there's people that have an actual phobia about it. That's one of them.
It's just another day.
Well, let me tell you something. That guy that's run into the thing. Let me see if okay. As far as I suppose. Uh,
Friday the 13th.
okay, this is another instance. I looked these up. Again, I don't know what the odds were that you could compare the same thing happening on other days, whether this was really an unlucky day. Okay, this is the HMS Her Majesty's ship Friday. All right. To dispel the superstition surrounding Friday the 13th, the British Navy commissioned a ship called the HMS Friday. In the 19th century, the captain's name was James Friday, and the ship set sail on Friday, only to disappear forever.
And he lost his hair on Friday.
Okay, that's the astronauts. No. Now, all right, it says legend has it that the Great Flood, documented in many texts around the world, from Mesopotamian stories, Hindu Puranas, Greek mythology, and lore of the Mayans and Native Americans, began on a Friday. Next one, this is Apollo 13 mishap. The ill-fated Apollo 13 was launched on April 11th, 1970. The sum of the digits of the date add up to 13. Apollo 13 was to be launched to its landing site on Moon at 13:13 hours military time, Houston time. While NASA and mission crew laughed at the idea of the mission being cursed, the number of problems they faced eventually aborting the mission have only added to superstition surrounding Friday the 13th. Buckingham Palace bombing. Germans bombed Buckingham Palace on Friday, September 13th, 1940. Both King George VI and Queen Elizabeth barely escaped. I never heard of this thing. Chilean plane disappears. Okay, this is the one that we talked about, the one that disappeared in the Andes and the passengers ate the dead ones. Okay, the Bola cyclone, often termed the deadliest cyclone over the Bay of Bengal in eastern India, killed at least 500,000 people. The cyclone struck the coast on November 12, 1970, and created maximum havoc over land on Friday the 13th, November 1970. All right. Blah, blah, blah. All right. I guess this is it. Do you want to tell you one last story, Henry?
Yeah.
Go for it.
The people that ate those people, when they were picked up and they were saved, the majority of them lost their mind.
Yeah, I had heard of that. That they were besides the stress of
they had a breakdown of the fact that they ate those people and they were never the same.
Yeah, that the fact that they had to resort to eating their friends, they were alive, but which, if you think about it, it's not understandable. But they were never the same.
Okay.
So it's hit it.
Right.
Dun, 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 dun.
This one is kind of messed up but funny.
Okay. Now remember, his idea of funny might not be your idea of funny. Just a disclaimer. Go ahead.
It's like sick funny.
See? Okay.
We had a friend of ours that, well, before I met Martin, I had a friend of ours that him and his girlfriend were looking for a mattress. And mattresses, even back then, they weren't Sealy, Posturepedic, or whatever.
Posturepedic?
Yeah. But they were extremely expensive.
This was back in New York or down here?
No, Jersey.
In Jersey, okay.
And they were looking and looking and looking. And that was when Craigslist was at its infancy. So they were looking, and they finally found a mattress. The guy's family were selling the mattress. So, and they said that it was brand new, still in the bag. So they said, okay. So they asked me and my friend to go with them to help them put it in the pickup truck, because it was a king size, and his girlfriend was only like 4'9", and she could fit in the mattress. Okay. And so we went and we looked at it and said, okay. But it had like well, they don't do it now. They had like a cover.
Okay.
And then the plastic.
Right.
so you couldn't really see how the mattress looked like. And they figure a brand new king size mattress for $200.
But what happened? It was wrapped into plastic, is what you're
Yeah,
saying. It was still had that plastic. Okay.
yeah. So you're getting ahead of the game.
Okay.
So they didn't know what was going to be a surprise for them. So we got it. We built the frame and everything, and the box spring was still in the package.
Yeah.
So we get it to the bedroom, and we unwrap everything. We get it all nice, and then we unwrap the mattress, and then see a lot of red on the mattress. And my friend was furious. He goes, "What the heck?" And he started like looking, and looking. He goes, "Effing hell, that's blood." So
Okay.
they called the guy, and the guy apologized and got really nervous and apologized. And he said that his mother killed his father,
Okay.
and that they gave him the wrong mattress. The mattress they were going to give him was in the guest bedroom that they never
Okay.
used.
Because I'm thinking to myself, how did these people think that this was going to be overlooked? So
Because they were going to sell the house.
I see.
They were
Okay.
going to sell the house, and they were trying to just like forget about this because his mother got arrested. And the thing about it, his mother got arrested was like a crime of passion
Yeah.
kind of thing. So they were trying to until they figure out whether she's gonna be put in a nut house or go to jail. In the meantime, he had to sell the house and all his contents so they could pay for her lawyer and everything else.
Okay.
So he said, "Look, guys, come
He's
back."
like, oops.
No, he said, "Look, guys," he apologized, which was true. He said he was overwhelmed doing everything for his mother.
Right.
He just gave him the wrong mattress because both mattresses were in the hallway.
Okay.
So he apologized, said, "Just throw that one away, take it to the dump, come back, and I'll give it to you. I'll give you back the money and I'll give it to you. It was my fault." So I said, "Oh, we gave back $200. I'll take a trip back." So they went to South Jersey and picked it up, and then that's when he was said, "While we're here, let's find out the real story. This might be interesting. This might be cool."
All right.
So he went and asked the kid, and the kid was in his late 20s,
Okay.
and he goes, "So what happened?" He said that the father used to hit the mother when he got drunk because his mother used to call him out about having a mistress.
Oh boy. Yeah. There you go.
And being Italian, he said that was normal for some Italians, but she wasn't buying it. So she pulled out his gun out of his drawer. That's why he should keep it locked. And
Don't worry unless you have your own gun like I do.
yeah, right. Okay, Battle of the Roses,
Okay.
War of the Roses, and she shot him 8 times.
Okay. Do you think she
She
was a little
unloaded.
bit?
She
She was mad.
unloaded a thing on him, and just so that he couldn't have an open coffin, she shot him in the face.
I guess she was a little bit upset, just a little bit.
I mean, literally disfigured his face so they couldn't have a open casket.
But it makes you think that if this had been going on, the only thing I can think of,
She never caught him.
she had caught him.
No, because the lady called the house and she picked it up.
Oh,
So
there
then she
you
started
go.
figuring out, started putting 2 and 2 together why the the trips that he wasn't, they weren't.
Yeah, she
and
like
when he was going to card games where his friends were still in the house, in their house, what card games?
yeah.
All kinds of stuff
In other
like
words,
that.
she started putting 2 and 2 together.
Yeah, like stuff that didn't fit.
Now it fit.
Yeah, 8 bullets worth.
And the moral of that story is, be careful who you
No,
marry.
no,
Crazy,
no,
crazy is as crazy
And
does.
the moral of the story is don't be an asshole.
No, but let me tell you, don't get me wrong, folks. I know that there's times, especially when there's infidelity, but shooting somebody, come on, Henry. That whether it's the woman to the man, now I will say
That's what she said, crime of passion.
Oh
because
wait, but
she
now
lost her SH, and she wasn't
No,
she had, wasn't in
no.
the front,
You know what
right
it
frame of
is?
mind, and she felt betrayed,
The
and she
only
was angry, and she shot him
no,
behind.
but you said something also which you think about. If he had been beating her, that could have been the
The trigger.
yeah. That it wasn't just
No
a
pun
question.
intended.
It wasn't just a question of infidelity. It was maybe a history of abuse and this, and she
And he
lost her.
was like 7 or 8 years older.
It happens. It happens. I wonder if that happened on Friday the 13th.
I don't know.
You never know. Anyway, guys, I hope you like this Mardi Gras show. It's been great to meet with you guys again. This is the third year. Hopefully, we'll have it next year. The next one that will be coming up will be in October for Halloween. All right, we'll be having a Halloween show. So, but for those of you who come back every week to see stories of the supernatural, please thank you. And don't forget to go to miamighostchronicles.com, mpelliser.com. You can sign up for my Substack newsletter. On there I have a bunch of interesting things. And until next time, I will be back soon. Take care.